Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. It has been called the world's most savage war and the deadliest conflict since the end of the Second World War. The brutal conflict that has ravaged the Democratic Republic of Congo has claimed nearly 4 million lives. In its wake lie disease, environmental destruction, and famine. The vast resource wealth of Congo is an important factor in this war. The country's great reserves of coltan, vital to rockets, reactors, and mobile telephones, has become a much prized objective and a sustaining force in the violence. The exploitation of coltan has joined with history, ethnic rivalry, regional ambition, and corruption to make peacemaking in Congo an extraordinarily complex challenge. My guest is John Katunga, former acting executive director of the Nairobi Peace Initiative and a current African policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. John, welcome to Dialogue.
Oh, thank you.
John, I'm honored to have you here. It seems to me, John, that history is one of the most prominent actors in the misery that has afflicted the people of the Congo. I'm thinking, for example, of King Leopold of Belgium, who in the 19th century really enslaved the country, made it his own plantation, exploited it for rubber. And then after that, we have seen copper, diamonds, and today, of course, we have coltan as the mineral that's being exploited. Is there a kind of a pattern to this, John, a pattern of exploitation and cruelty?
Yes, George. But before I just respond to your question, I need to just list here my appreciation for inviting me to this.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Program, very famous program and prestigious one, actually, and especially selecting the subject of talking about my country. We don't have enough coverage in the media, and most of Congolese think that the reason why sometimes the world have forgotten us. A country that have seen 4 million people dying should have really raised enough emotion around the world and enough reaction and responses to the situation. This is coming late, and as usual, you say it comes late and sometimes little. So the magnitude of response that we need in Congo today is quite little, and as you see, and you can read in the papers, we don't feature in the papers.
That's right. I think that's been true, John, and I appreciate your kind words. But I think that's been true all along. For example, when we speak of these patterns of exploitation over time, the world outside, the world of us, we consumers, has paid little attention to what's been the human price.
That's true. The patterns have remained the same. Since before King Leopold II, there was slavery.
Exactly.
And many Congolese have gone to slavery. And as you know, it was a brutal kind of endeavor during that time. And after slave trade, then King Leopold II acquired the whole of Congo as a private property. And the brutality that he inflicted on Congolese people have seen 10 million dying, and that's a genocide that is forgotten by the history. Immediately after, and by the way, there is something that you need to note here. The patterns of Congolese suffering, and mostly African suffering in general, has always been attached to the development in the developed world.
Yes.
Yeah. So the discovery of rubber during King Leopold II meant that the Congolese have to undergo forced labor, just was accompanied by unnamed brutality that is well described in the book of King Leopold Ghosts.
As a matter of fact, we had the author of King Leopold's Ghost as a guest on Dialogue, and I'll never forget, when you mentioned the brutality, just for our viewers to understand it, the hands of villagers would be cut off if certain quotas of production were not met.
Exactly.
And John, you made another very powerful point, and I hope no one loses it, that the really most awful periods of Congolese suffering have been connected, ironically, to development, whenever something new is discovered. And that leads to something I wanted to ask you about right now. What many people who study the Congo call the Congolese paradox. In other words, the wealth has never been to the benefit of the people.
Yeah, that's right.
Would you comment on that?
Oh, of course. It is really something that is striking in the Congolese crisis, whereby the Congolese people are like beggars seated on a stone of diamond. So that paradox is explained partly by the leadership. The leadership even before the independence. So King Leopold II was a leader in a way of the Congolese people during his time. And then the colonial time, for 80 years, Congo was a colony of Belgium. And the Belgians performed very well, rationalized the exploitation of Congolese resources, and didn't prepare the Congolese to take over. So the patterns of colonial time was like they will stay there forever. And so there was no preparation when people started agitating for independences. And when we got the independence, we were not prepared. So we had a leadership deficit that was there, and which made the Congolese state so vulnerable to external involvement. And as we were independent, and many Congolese just joke around this, we had the flag independence, but we didn't have the autonomy of our own management of our resources and also our politics. So at the end of the day, it was that the leaders were responding to external kind of needs and the interests, rather than responding the needs of the people inside the country.
That's a very powerful point. I love the way you explain that, John, because if I understand you correctly, independence really changed nothing in this pattern of exploitation. The same culture continued.
That's right.
And there's the leadership deficit, really. There really is no leadership for the people, but rather a kind of corrupt little bargaining among
that's right.
a group of greedy people.
Yeah, that's precisely the point. And the case of Congo may be particular to Congo, but it can be generalized to most of African countries during that particular time. But we need to add a second element. We came to independence during a particular time in the world.
Cold War.
Yes, we were in the framework of the Cold War, and most probably, surely the Western powers were looking for a leader that is obedient enough, that espouse the ideology that we're putting across, and some nationalistic behavior were perceived at that particular time as being against the interest of the West.
Exactly.
And that's where we saw, for example, Patrice Emery Lumumba, who was a nationalistic leader who came out of the elections, being murdered immediately after he took power and started managing the state affairs. And immediately we had a period of crisis like the one we have witnessed since 1996, whereby with the help of the international community, everybody to start to stabilize the situation, we undergo a process of election. And when we achieved the first round of election, which was the parliamentary elections, and we are now preparing for the presidential elections.
It'll be October 29th, you have the...
No, in the past. I'm talking about immediately after the independence.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's the time Mobutu took over in 1965. And we suffered from his dictatorship until he was ousted out by Kabila.
Yeah. I'm so glad you bring Mr. Mobutu into our conversation, and also the influence of the West and the Cold War, because this is something else I think we in the West have got amnesia about. You know, we don't call it to mind that so many of the problems, travails, difficulties of Africa owe to impositions, if you will, of the West on the leadership at that time. There was this pervading fear of communism, and of course we saw the assassination of Mr. Lumumba, and then all the difficulties. But the West, and let's be honest, the United States played a pivotal role in many of those developments.
That's true. There is a responsibility in the West, and I'm happy that you are bringing this out. And I think in international relation, the responsibility amnesia is one of the principles. I think it's a golden principle.
Golden principle.
Yeah, we don't take stock of what we did in the past. And so we consider the situation as it has started right now, and we need to find current solutions or updated solutions.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because I think we both know, John, that the people in the West, they look at Africa and they say, well, why can't they get it right? You know, why are they messing it up so much? You know, why are there so many problems, et cetera, et cetera? Well, there is a lot of progress no one pays attention to, but insofar as the problems, no one pays attention to what the history was.
That's right.
What the Western influence was.
That's right. Of course, we cannot be stuck in the past and say all our miseries are explained by external involvement. We have our own responsibilities as Africans, and I talked about the leadership, as I mentioned. But all in all, again, if we just say this is an African crisis and need to be resolved by Africans, so it's an African problem and needs African solutions, then the amnesia comes in.
Right, right.
And that's where I think we need to mix the two, not to go to the extreme that this is an African problem, need to be resolved by Africans themselves. They are responsible for what happened. But on the other side, we cannot blame totally the external world for all what have happened to us.
No, we can't.
We have mutual responsibility.
Mutual responsibilities, indeed, John. And that's exactly what I think you and I are talking about. These things will have to work together if there's going to be a better future.
Absolutely.
Part of the problem is ignorance. For example, when I mentioned Coltan and cell phones, and I don't think we understand necessarily the connection of these resources, the trade in them, and the problems they cause in Congo because, you know, of certain manipulations. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I want to ask you this, though, right now, because one of the things that I know is very important to you in the Nairobi Peace Initiative is getting representatives of the people involved in the processes to bring about peace and progress in Congo and throughout Africa. How important is that?
It's extremely important. It's extremely important to the level where, and I say this is a deficit in some of the conflict resolutions mechanisms that we have today. And that's my personal opinion and my observation. The framework under which we operate to resolve conflicts today is based on the fact that we bring on the table of negotiations the people who have the highest capacity to harm. So at the end of the day, you have the very people who have victimized the population seated at the table of negotiation for a power sharing kind of framework. And so the outcome of that power sharing is to have leaders who have their hands full of blood, now talking on behalf of people and trying to bring people to sanity, the situation to sanity. And that's, I think, is a deficit. And that's where I'm advocating, and I always say this, that at the table of negotiation, we need to expand the table of negotiation and also include the people who have really experienced firsthand the suffering of those very leaders who are now struggling for power. That's one element. The second element, I think, is also important to bring at the table of negotiation, what I'm calling the expanded table of negotiation, is to see, for example, the case of Congo, whereby natural resources have played a major role in sustaining the war and creating so many victims, that we need to expand this to those who are invisible in manufacturing this kind of conflicts. If coltan, for example, gold, diamond, for that matter, has been at the source or a sustaining factor of our violences, it is as important to bring this multinational to the same table of negotiation so that their cards are clear, or at least to know how to handle their involvement in the situation of conflict that Africa and many countries are suffering from.
I think that's absolutely wise, because what you're saying is, let's get the needs of the people, the suffering of the people, and the management of the resources right into the negotiation, right from the start, as a part of whatever is settled and agreed to.
Exactly, exactly. Because if any solution is found but does not please the very people who want to access to natural resources, we see the pattern revising. So peace may come, but it will not last.
There'll be another cycle later on.
Exactly, because we didn't respond to the needs of those who want to access and control some of this so-called strategic resources.
You're going to be pleased at this, John. One of my other guests was Klaus Topfer some years ago. And here's something he said, and I think you'll appreciate it. Environmental security is the disarmament policy of the future. Is that something you would agree with?
Absolutely, absolutely. And on various levels. Mm-hmm. It can be locally, mm-hmm. it can be nationally, regionally, or internationally. Mm-hmm. If we find a modus vivendi on how, or modus operandi, on how the management of resources can be done, mm-hmm. and everybody in the chain of management can have its share. Right. On that management, if you can find a consensus on that, will reduce by half the likelihood of most of the conflicts we are suffering from, especially in Africa today.
I want people, myself included, to get a good understanding of just how brutal things can be, what we're talking about here. So I have my own little cell phone somewhere here, so let me just, everyone has one of these. Everyone watching, I know they're everywhere in the world, people are walking around with these. And in this one and all the others, there's Coltan. Yes. And Coltan is what people are fighting over right now. John, I want you to tell us a little bit about that conflict, because I mean, we mentioned 4 million people being killed now. The war has taken on this character. But the actors in this war are not only Congolese, there are outside nations involved, many of them. There are major corporations funding this. I mean, it's like a novel, isn't it? I mean, explain the complexities of this thing.
Yeah, it's hard to explain every single detail, but from the digger of Coltan, mm-hmm. to the mobile phone, mm-hmm. Of course, there are many hands that mineral has passed through. But the end result is the digger, where the Coltan is coming from, remain poor. Mm-hmm.
These are villagers mostly, yes. Men and women and children.
Yes, they use their hands to do that, mm-hmm. sometimes forced labor, mm-hmm. To just dig the Coltan. And many people are displaced. There is a catastrophe, for example, in some of the forests, which are the site, the world heritage, like the Kahuzi-Biga forest, where even the stream of rivers has been diverted so that they can acquire and they can dig the...
They divert the stream so they can acquire
yes, so that they reach the... So we have an ecological catastrophe, but we have also human catastrophe. Mm-hmm. The insecurity in the area where the coltan is exploited mm-hmm. is very high, and that's where the people were disputing, mm-hmm. fighting to control those kind of areas so they can access that mineral. And neighboring countries of Congo have been extremely involved in this. Right. 2000, to give just an idea about the stakes that are at play here, in 2000 it said, and it has been documented, that $20 million were reaped every month for coltan. From 1999 to 2000, Rwandan and the rebels in eastern Congo were extracting up to $20 million a month as the outcome of extracting minerals in Congo. And then they take the minerals were collected, passed through Rwanda and Uganda, mm-hmm. and taken to the ocean and find a place in Europe for right. processing. Right. And from there, they go to international markets for the manufacturers of mobile phones and
right. And this is an extraordinary story. I mean, $20 million a month through this trade. The villagers are getting nothing but brutality and suffering. We're having what people call ecocide, yes. in terms of the destruction of the environment, and animals too, being killed.
The wildlife,
being destroyed. But at the end of this process, and this is the most intriguing thing to me, John, we have people like me and you and everyone else buying the product, and major corporations, very legitimate corporations in Europe and this country and elsewhere, who are, of course, involved in the finance of the trade of coltan. So there's so many actors in this, so many levels. It is staggering when you think about it.
And that's the reason why I was insisting that when we are trying to find solutions to our problem, mm-hmm. we need to bring all those actors in the open.
Right.
Because at the village there, when people are being killed, mm-hmm. there is no single presence of multinational.
That's right.
They didn't come with all their machinery and
there's no direct connection.
There's no flag there, indicating that this is the multinational that is behind this kind of deals. The people are dying over there, but those who are reaping the benefit of their death and their suffering are, of course, in the civilized world and civilized people.
I think if we are truly in the civilized world, I think we have to recognize we all have responsibility here. You know, that it's not just a matter of government, it's a matter of people. People like myself, consumers, who have to say, you know, we have to pay attention to these things.
Absolutely. And I think this has been also pushed by the UN and passed several resolutions that were, and also inquiry teams. The team of experts were sent to inquire, to investigate this whole commerce of from the exploitation to the manufacturing, and several reports were put across, and responsibilities were also identified. But where it is striking and sometimes making people feel hopeless is that there was no action taken.
Well, no action taken, but John, it goes back to something you said at the start of our conversation. I'm sure the reports are excellent in their conclusions and their processing and such, but perhaps even like the news coverage, they don't get public attention. I mean, I think that, you know, from the start of our conversation, for people to hear that 4 million people have died, $20 million a month is extracted, and this kind of thing, and so forth, all of this is probably coming as news. You know, these things simply do not get the attention they deserve in the world, I don't think.
Few journalists toured the Congo and published some of the reports, and I need to really congratulate here organizations like Global Witness, International Rescue Committee, and others who have really done tremendous work in trying to bring this up. And by the way, this is also another pattern. As much as we had the death pattern, the lethal pattern, or where any discovery in the West meant the death in many African countries, especially in Congo. Right. But at the same time, we need to recognize here that there were people in same West who were fighting for the rights of the Congolese people. And I need to, if you read the book of King Leopold the Ghost, then you will identify Edmond Morel, who spent almost his whole life.
A British civil servant who devoted himself to Congo.
Yes. The same way we have also today organizations that are still also advocating for the halting of this kind of predatory exploitation of natural resources in Congo, and we need to appreciate that too.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there are valiant fighters on behalf of Congo, and they must be encouraged. I want you to give us at least a word, John, on something else that's vital to this entire situation, and that, of course, is the democratic process itself. Since that election of Lumumba 46 years ago, we went 46 years without an election until this year, I think. And now we have a runoff, I believe, between President Joseph Kabila and Jean-Pierre Bemba. In a few days, well, at the end of October. How hopeful are you for this, the internal democratic process? Because I think stable government is essential to anything we want there.
Yes, of course, to find a solution to this, what we call the predatory exploitation of these natural resources, you need some responsible institutions to control not only the territory and guarantee the security of people, but at the same time be able to manage the resources that we have internally. And this process has been going. And thanks again to the international community and all the people of goodwill, and also the UN, that have made contribution to see the Congolese people moving from the violence and the prevalence of insecurity to a government that will be responsible for the country. And we are building these institutions and with the hope that will take responsibility in guaranteeing precisely this. I have a lot of hope. I'm optimistic with this process, because it's the first time that for the first time the international community the members of the international community are demonstrating real commitment to bring and help the Congolese people to put into place institutions that will take them really to development. And so we have passed the first round, and nobody gave us the chance of that first round. But the commitment of the people, almost 20 million people turned out. Nobody felt that will be possible. It was a small miracle. We have done it. And so I'm very hopeful about the second phase that we are undergoing. We have seen the members of the parliament being elected, and they have been already sworn in. And so we are putting slowly the institutions that will take the people and to really heights that we are expecting, and putting back the country in the concept of nation at the place that it deserves, as one of the lungs for development of Africa and the world.
You know, John, I am so delighted, really, that we can bring our conversation to a conclusion on just this note of hopefulness, because all along I've been struck just by how balanced you have been, how realistic. And we've certainly talked about history, but to hear you say that these recent developments, the current elections, the 20 million people turning out for them, the enthusiasm, points to a brighter future. That's very powerful. That's something you personally powerfully believe.
Yes. Of course, we have some challenges that we need to think about. Is the sustainability of the international community commitment. That needs to be guaranteed, because most of the time when elections are done and they are completed, the international community washes their hands and, yeah, we have done it, just take it over now. But it will be a very nascent kind of government that will need absolute support for the international community. Second fear I have is that the neighbors will not interfere anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, John, I join you in both those hopes, and I really appreciate that point about sustained attention and helpful attention from the outside world, and helpful attention or help from the neighboring countries and powers. Thank you so much for being with us today, John.
It was my pleasure.
Mine indeed. And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue at wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue's also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching. John, thank you for talking. Man, you did a great job.